بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أهلا بكم مجددا لتكملة محاضرة القصة القصيرة لأقسام اللغة الانجليزية المرحلة الثانية كليات التربية العلوم الانسانية. أحييكم من جامعة الانبار أستاذ المساعد الدكتور أحمد حميد عبيد، وتكملة لما بدأناه في محاضرات سابقة في القصة الثانية اللي هي لهابي برنس by Oscar Wilde. Mostly welcome all. Actually, in the last lecture, we deal with the text itself. And just to remind you what's going on, what was going on actually, we have read the text of the short story, the open window, and it is usually presented by students to deal with the text and with the most notable words and what are the lexical meanings of these words and the way we understand actually the plot of the story, the types of character, main characters, kinder characters, round characters, and what is the intention behind. Now we are going to deal in detail actually with the story, highlighting some points that I want my students to write down and to keep in mind what's going on as a type of analysis and appreciation in order to be able to use English as simple as possible, describing what's going on in this story. And as an advanced step is to write down an appreciation or an analysis about certain questions that may be raised at the end of this lecture about this story. So the intention behind now, to urge students, to excite students, to use English, to talk about, to describe what's going on in the story under the guidance of a teacher. So now we can see such type of information as a background of the open window. Think about the different reasons why people lie. A student usually, after reading the text of the open window, he will see that the axial point of the plot depends on a lie. This lie presented by Vera, and she was able to fabricate a plot of a story, making use of Mr. Nuttall's sick state of mind, and that he doesn't know anyone in this place that he joined for nerve care, and unfortunately he didn't find his intention, and vice versa happened with him. He was under pressure of Vera and under the pressure of telling a lie, of the tragedy of Mr. Sableton, and you know the details of the story. So think of the different reasons why people lie. Just give it a thought. Think of, is it allowed to lie? Is it allowed to fabricate events? I mean fake events. So it is not allowed like this, especially with those we do not know, especially with those who are sick. And what type of sickness? He is psychologically sick. He comes for rest, but he was under pressure of telling him a very big lie of the tragedy of Mr. Sableton. So sometimes a lie is told in order not to hurt someone's feelings. And even though it is not allowed, to tell lies. Some may make an excuse that I told a lie in order not to hurt someone's feelings or to get out of trouble. He may find a vent, he may find an excuse to say that why he is telling lies, but it is not good. Even though you may tell lies in order not to hurt someone's feelings or to get out of trouble. To be out of trouble is to be honest, not to tell lies. To be direct, to say things as it is. You will be saved, not to tell lies. So the open window by Sake, Mrs. Sableton's niece, Vera, lies for her own entertainment. She doesn't have an excuse to tell lies. Neither not to hurt someone's feeling, nor to get out of trouble. She is not in trouble to tell lies. She is telling lies for her own entertainment, just for the sake of entertainment. She has a type of interest to tell lies, to fabricate events, to tell fake stories. You see? So when the protagonist, Frampton Nettle, visits his sister's friend, Mrs. Sableton, while on vacation, Mrs. Sableton's niece tells him a tragic story about the death of Mrs. Sableton's husband and brother. But in fact, there is nothing. There is no tragedy at all, but it was out of her imagination and out of her interest and out of her entertainment to tell and fabricate such type of a lie and to convince Mr. Nettle that the Aunt Sableton has a tragedy because of the disappearance of her husband and her two younger brothers 3 years ago while they were making shooting. So Sableton's husband and brother, while on a hunting trip 3 years ago. Imagine his surprise when the three men show up again later in the story. So you have to think of this, what happened with Mr. Nettle. He was told that they left 3 years ago and they disappeared and they will never come back because they didn't find them in the marshes, in the bog. Imagine what type of mental state Mr. Nettle has when he saw them coming back from the open window. They came up from the marshes and he was mentally disturbed. And he was told by a very fabricated story told by Vera. So his mind actually didn't bear or didn't expect to see them again. So when they came back, he believes that they are only ghosts. And he is mentally prepared in advance to accept the appearance of ghosts. Why? Because Vera told him that they have gone and will not come back. So the question here is actually a type of lesson that do not tell lies. And if you are having an interest of entertainment, you have to know when to make entertainment and where and with whom to make such type of entertainment, because you may hurt unconsciously someone's feeling and you may be a cause for another problem that is unexpected for those who you are telling them your lies. So be careful with your friends, be careful with your family. Do not tell lies, even though it is your interest or even though it may excite entertainment anywhere. We have to go through details about the characters that are in this story. You have to know the relationship between each two characters. You have to know what type of central characters do we have. What type of round character do we have? What type of secondary characters do we have? If you are able to nominate them one by one, you will be able to draw the type of relationship in between, and then to understand the type of plot and events happened for each one. I mean for each character. So don't go for appreciation unless you know some details about these characters. The way the author present characters. You remember when we first gave you certain definitions, you know about something called characterization. So characterization has nothing to do with types of characters, because it depends on the way the writer or the author raised up the role of each character within the story. How did it start? When did it appear? And how it is developed within the story and how it ends. So this is the type of characterization. Unless you know something about the way the writer builds up this character, you will not be able to appreciate and analyze any type of question that may be raised later on. So Frampton, who's Nettle's sister, she writes several letters of introduction to keep her brother Frampton from being lonely on his retreat to the countryside. Actually, this character does not appear in the story. She was not there in the story. So her role is very, very limited. You know, when she gave her brother a letter of introduction to some people she visited years back, in order not to feel alone, because he is sick and he was looking for care. She writes one such letter in order to introduce him to Mrs. Sableton. So the intention of this introduction letter, just to introduce Mr. Nettle, I mean her brother, to Mrs. Sableton. This is how Frampton finds himself in Mrs. Sableton's home. So she gave him a letter of introduction and the address in order to be there for rest. Now the second character is Mr. Frampton Nettle, a nervous man. Frampton Nettle arrives in a new town seeking relaxation, but he unfortunately didn't find such type of relaxation. He found another of pressure and a type of tension and a type of people who tell lies. Now Mr. Mooney, Mrs. Sableton's youngest brother, again he was very, very limited role. He didn't appear much in the story, but the last scene, when they came back from hunting, he appears as the youngest brother for Mrs. Sableton. And member of the hunting party, he often teases her by singing a short song. He just keeps on singing like this. And we have Mr. Sableton, Mrs. Sableton's husband and a member of the hunting party. Again, he has very limited role. he appears in the last scene. He was a leader of this party, of this group, of hunting a group. When he came back home after this hunting day, Mr. Nuttall runs away. He believes that they were nothing but ghosts. We have Mrs. Sableton, Frampton host, and Vera's aunt. She played a very good role, and she unconsciously helped Vera to convince Mr. Nuttall in what he is expecting to face, as he was told by Vera, a type of tragedy. When she talks about the open window, if he minds or if he doesn't mind about opening the window in such a time. And we have Vera, who is the main character, the central character, a leading character. She leads the events right from the beginning up to the end. And right from the beginning, the first sentence is told by Vera. And we know certain information about her. She is a 15 years old girl who greets Frampton and informs him of her aunt's great tragedy. But in fact, there was no tragedy, neither big, neither great, neither small one. But it was out of her fabrication. To make a general overview of the story, you have to think of the following. Actually, in the open window, Frampton Nuttall is the protagonist, seeking peace and quiet in a rural setting. So he was seeking peace and quiet in a rural setting on the advice of his doctor. He was advised by his doctors to go to the rural place just for the sake of calmness and for the sake of peace. Frampton is hoping to calm his fragile nerves. He is at the home of Mr. Sableton with a letter of introduction from his sister, who visited the setting 4 years previous, or 4 years ago. This is a general overview. Vera is the self-possessed niece of Mr. Sableton, a young lady of only 15. She is the first to greet Frampton upon his arrival at Mrs. Sableton's home. Quiet, a storyteller, Vera takes advantages of an opportunity where she discovers that Frampton knows little about her aunt. That's why she succeeded actually to convince him with the tragedy she is talking about. With excellent timing, Vera succeeded in doing to Frampton the opposite of what his doctor have ordered, because his doctor ordered him to have peace and quiet time, but the opposite happened with Mr. Nuttall because of the lie told by Vera. Mrs. Sableton is the owner of the home that Frampton visits. She appears after Vera's story of how she lost her husband and brothers in a terrible tragedy. So Frampton feels sorry for her and notes Mrs. Sableton frequently glancing at the window where he believes she saw her husband and brothers for the last time. Having no knowledge of Vera's story, Mrs. Sableton announces the arrival of her husband and brothers. Her announcement causes Frampton to flee her home, believing he sees ghosts. What happens in the open window? Now you may keep on asking yourself what happened in the open window. The open window, a young woman named Vera frightens the visiting Mr. Nuttall with a lie about her uncle. Here is the gist of the story. What's going on? It talks about a young woman named Vera frightens the visiting Mr. Nuttall. He was visiting them and she frightened him with a lie about her uncle, Mr. Sableton, or Mr. Sableton, and his two brothers-in-law, drawing in a board. When Nettle sees the man walking towards the house, he assumes there are ghosts who will come and through the open window. Why? Because he is prepared to accept such type of events when Vera told him like this. And we have Mr. Nettle visits the country at the urging of his doctor. He arrives at the home of his new hosts, the Sableton, and is received by Mrs. Sableton's niece Vera. Again, this is another important information that a student may keep in mind to express himself later on, whether in oral presentation or writing down an answer about a question in his examination. So Vera tells him that her uncle and his brothers-in-law drowned in a boat 3 years before, and that her aunt leaves the French window open because she believes they will one day return. You see, this is a lie, of course, but Mr. Nettle believes it. Why? Because he is mentally prepared to accept such type of lie. So when the men walk towards the house, Mr. Nettle thinks they are ghosts and flees the house immediately. Why? Because he believes that they are ghosts. You see, he didn't expect that they will come back again, as told by Vera. Vera lies about his reasons for leaving. Again, Vera make another lie about his leaving, because he left as quick as possible, claiming that he was once attacked by dogs in India and is afraid of Spartan Spaniel because of it. This is another lie told by Vera about Mr. Nettle when they are astonished because Mr. Nettle leaves as quick as possible when he saw them. She told them that he is afraid of dogs and not because of meeting you. Now we have more details a student may say about the plot. This is another, let us say, summary or good information that the students may keep in mind to say about the story. For example, Frampton Nettle suffers from a nervous condition, has moved to the country on his doctor's advice to have rest. His sister has lived in the area he visits and has given him letters of introduction to his new neighbors. The story concerns his visit to the home of one of these neighbors, who is Mrs. Sableton. Another important information that Mr. Nettle meets Mrs. Sableton's niece Vera, who entertains him until her aunt is available. So she was talking with him while they were waiting the aunt to come downstairs, and she exploits actually this time by making a trick and lie with Mr. Nettle. Vera, apparently bored with her guest, is graced with an overactive imagination. Once she determines that Mr. Nettle knows nothing about the family, when she asks him 2-3 questions that, have you ever been here? Do you know anyone here? When she becomes sure that he doesn't know anything, yes, about the family, about people who are living there, she starts to make a type of lie and fabricated her story with Mr. Nettle. Once she determines that Mr. Nettle knows nothing about the family and is a very literal-minded fellow. He was naive. He was simple man. He was literal-minded fellow. Vera spins a gothic yarn involving her aunt. She was creating a story of a tragedy, and she involves her aunt to play with her what is going on out of her imagination, whom she characterizes as mentally disturbed widow. So Mr. Nettle concludes that the aunt is a mentally disturbed widow. And why? Because of the tragedy happened to her husband and her two younger brothers 3 years ago, because they went for hunting, shooting, but they didn't come back again. So this is the story that she fabricates. 3 years ago, Mr. Sableton and his two young brothers-in-law went hunting, leaving the house through a French window, which was left open until their return. This is what Vera told him, that why she left the window open, because she is expecting them to come back home, which was left open until their return. However, all 3 of them were lost in a bog that day, Vera asserts, and their bodies were never recovered. They didn't find them. And this is the reason behind Mrs. Sableton's tragedy. Because Vera told Mr. Nettle that Mrs. Sableton does not believe that they didn't find their bodies. And this is type of a tragedy. She is expecting always that they will come back again. So the aunt, driven to distraction by her grief and loss, left the window open thereafter, anticipating that they will come back someday with the little brown spaniel that was lost with them. Still now, Vera is telling lies and walk in that window just as they used to do. So when Mr. Sableton finally appears, she explains why the window is open. She doesn't know what Vera told Mr. Nettle. And when she appears for the first time, when she came down to meet Mr. Nettle, she told him why they left the window open like this, apparently confirming Vera's story. And this is the point, that what is told by Mrs. Sableton confirms, asserts, makes sure of what is told by Vera about this window. Mr. Nettle then tells Mrs. Sableton about his nervous disorder and his need to avoid any mental excitement. But he didn't find that. He was terribly excited. He was terribly mentally excited by Vera. You see, Mrs. Sableton is clearly bored, but at that very moment, she sees her husband and the brothers returning from their hunt. Vera appears to be horrified by the sight. This is only to complete her fabrication, to complete her lie with Mr. Nettle. She appears to be terrified or horrified by the sight of them. When she saw them, she explained that she is horrified. The nervous Mr. Nettle is therefore terrified and beats a hasty retreat from the house. So he was terrified again and runs out as quick as possible, believing that they are ghosts as far as what have been told by Vera and confirms by Mrs. Sableton. And again, in the closing paragraph, to end this story, the issue is clarified now. The problem is clarified, it's clear. The men had only that day gone hunting. This is the true story. That they had only that dog gone, or that they gone for hunting. Or they went for hunting the same day, not 3 years back as told by Vera. And Vera's vision was purely imaginary. Mr. Nettle has obviously been duped by Vera's story, but Vera, a habitual liar, does not explain his own behavior to the others. Instead, Vera invents another story that suggests Mr. Nettle had once been frightened by a pack of parlor dogs in a cemetery on the banks of Ganges, and apparently had bolted at the sight of the spaniel accompanies the hunter. Thus, Mr. Nettle is perfectly victimized by the young girl imagination. This is the end of the closing paragraph, and this is the end of our lecture today. I hope that you are interested with me following up the details of the story, wishing to meet you again in another occasion. Thank you very much.